So in order to validate their easy money policy, Powell basically has to say that any increases that we experience in consumer prices are just a temporary aberration, it's transitory, and don't worry about it. But I don't think that's the case at all. I think that what we're seeing now is the beginning of a very, very big acceleration in U.S. Consumer prices. Powell may think it's contained to a transitory event, but it's not. It's as much contained as the subprime crisis was contained. And I think the low inflation that we've enjoyed over the last 20, 25 years, I think a lot of that is through sleight of hand. I think that the CPI has actually gone, has not really reflected the extent to which prices have gone up. So I think we're understating the increase in consumer prices. But I think a lot of the temporary factors that were kind of mitigating the increases, because America was able to run these huge trade deficits. We were able to export our dollars to countries like China, and China would warehouse the dollars, recycle them into US treasuries, and then replace them with consumer goods. The Chinese were producing all these low-cost consumer goods for Americans to buy, and the rest of the world was helping out. And so these factors were mitigating consumer prices, plus a lot of the liquidity, the inflation that the Fed was creating. It went into the stock market, it went into the real estate market, into the cryptocurrency market, into the bond market. So I think a lot of these bubbles, as they deflate, the money is ultimately going to go into consumer prices, commodities, and things like that. And so we're about to see a tsunami of inflation. And whether the Fed is oblivious to it or just lying about it, there's no way to know. I think it was 70% of GDP when she said it was a problem, and now it's over 100%. And that's just debt held by the public, not total debt. Right. The question was, why aren't you worried anymore about the debt? And, her answer to that question was that, well, interest rates are really low. And the reason it's not a problem is because the rates are so low. And so servicing the debt is not that big a burden given how low rates are. But it's unfortunate that the senator who asked her that question didn't follow up with a better question. What happens when interest rates go up? I mean, isn't it reckless and irresponsible to say we can afford all this debt because temporarily we have these low rates of interest, knowing that the national debt is financed mostly with short-term paper, and the government has to constantly roll over these T-bills, and they're going to get the prevailing rate. Well, if you have this huge amount of debt and the only reason there's not a crisis is because interest rates are low, what happens if they're not low? What happens if interest rates are high? And I think that's the box the Federal Reserve is in, because the Federal Reserve knows the only thing between the US government and default or insolvency is artificially low interest rates. So if the Federal Reserve knows if it raises interest rates, it bankrupts the government, how is the Federal Reserve going to fight inflation? Because if this pickup in inflation is not transitory, and obviously the longer the Fed waits to acknowledge it's not transitory, the bigger the inflation problem becomes. And so if inflation is at 5 or 6 or 7% officially by the time the Fed realizes that it wasn't transitory, how does it fight that inflation without bankrupting the US government? The answer is it can't. So my thinking is, if it can't fight inflation without bankrupting the US government, it won't fight the inflation, which means it bankrupts the US public because it destroys the value of the dollar.
It's really quite simply the most important word for those of you in business or finance. No, the most important word is not income, expense, asset, liability. The most important word in the English language for the rich is a word called cash flow. You've got to know where the cash is flowing. So what a rich person is doing is controlling cash flow. So if money comes from an asset into your pocket, it's an asset. So very simply, when I was 9 years old, my rich dad said, assets put money in your pocket whether you work or not. Okay, repeat after me. Assets put money in your pocket whether you work or not. Okay? And very simply, liabilities take money from your pocket. And so it was my rich dad who said to me, he says, you know, Robert, if you really want to be rich, learn to build businesses. It made more sense to him to work hard to build a business, something you owned and something you could pass on for generation to generation to your kids. Whereas my poor dad said work hard, but my rich dad said, why would you work hard for something you'll never own and you can get fired from right away? Again, that was the difference in values. So my rich dad suggested I learn how to be a business owner and learn how to be an investor. And that's one of the big differences. On this side of the quadrant, these people here work for security. They work for money also. On this side over here, their key value that they want is they want freedom. They don't want to have to work at a job anymore. They don't want to have to work for the rest of their lives. So the beauty of building a business and learning how to invest is very simply that this is passive income. You work hard for a few years, but possibly for the rest of your life, income keeps flowing to you.